If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what are some of your unexplainable and creepy experiences? I was walking to work one morning at about 4 a.m., the dead quiet hour. As I came up to a fairly well-lit intersection, I saw a cyclist coming up the crossroad at a pace that would get them to the intersection at the same time, so I slowed down a little to let them pass without killing their momentum. As they passed, I saw two things really clearly, right under the street light. First, this thing was like 8 feet tall. It was riding a normal-sized adult bike but looked like it was on a kid's bike with how its legs were bent and coming up so high. Then it turned its face to look at me, and its face traced me as it kept riding along, seemingly not looking where it was going. Like its head was turning like an owl's following me. There were giant black holes where the eyes should have been, and its mouth was stretched across and up both sides of its face in a terrifying smile/grimace with the corners of its mouth way up on its forehead. I just quickened my pace and didn't look back. Haven't told a whole lot of people about it either, cause I figured they'd just brush it off as well. It was dark out. But I know what I clearly saw. In my old house, it was 125 years old when we bought it and lived there for around 13 years. The old man who had lived there did woodworking in the basement, and I'd always find random shelves. After a while I looked everywhere and assumed I used them all. Months later another one appeared in a spot right in front of things I swear it wasn't there. Sure, that could be I just missed it. But another thing in the basement was the longer I was down there the harder it got to breathe, yet my wife felt a more inviting aura. And this only ever happened to me and other men, but when walking up the stairs the door would slam shut on me and men as we got to the top. The door was slanted and would open on its own all the one, so it's weird it shut on us. We would see shadows in the kitchen while sitting at the bonfire. Pictures would fall off the wall and then into other rooms that there was no way they could have. My Funko Pop on a top shelf in corner, which had been there for over a year, flew off and across the room at me. I woke one night unable to move, feeling suffocated. There was this shadowy black creature on me, and when it noticed I saw it, it darted away into the corner. Another night I woke to pee, but when I looked across in the closet was a bunch of dark shadowy figures, some beast-like but all large. Standing in front of them was this young blonde girl wearing all white and glowing. It appeared as if she was holding the shadows in the closet. So after buying the house we found out that the young woman we bought it from had held multiple seances in the house. Back in September I was going up this one hill in a community trail to get back home. It's steep but it turns into this road on a winding path. It's still in the forest but people's backyards connect onto it. So I turned off the podcast I was listening to as I was heading up BC. It was pitch black out and I know coyotes walk even the neighborhoods, so better keep my senses uninterrupted. Also turned on the phone flashlight because you legit couldn't see 2 steps ahead of you. So I get maybe 2 minutes into this walk just down this trail, and yeah, it looks similar enough to that linked photo. It's quiet as hell out there even though it's only been like 10 minutes since the last passerby. Well, I get halfway through a straight part of the trail when randomly I see the ducking branches and bushes behind me illuminated with light. It's headlights following me. But they're still around the corner, so I'd if they saw me. That flashlight toggle on the phone got turned way off. Not doing that. So I'm like, God damn it, what the duck? I figure the absolute best case scenario, trail patrol, is nowhere near worth chancing the worst case. So I just book it for like 2 km straight and I lose them. No callouts for me or anything. They were just like 100-150 m behind me, so I had hopes about not being seen yet. I slow down for a bit once I know I'm not being followed, just spending my energy wisely, not trying to risk losing breath if it comes down to a chase. The headlights ducking come back. So this time I literally just bail out into the bushes off to the side, and now I'm sort of looking up at the road, so I'd blend in if the car or whatever it was drove past. It also gave me an out, like I could legit slide down ducking 200 meters voluntarily if I needed to and stick the landing. But here's the weird thing, it didn't. So I'm laying prone waiting for anything, staying as put as I can. It's already too late to make a move and any movement will be heard easily. The headlights turn off and I hear people talking. But it's people in their backyard on the other side of the trail, like 10 steps away in reality. I stare through the cracks of the leafless trees to see if the person following me is still there. No car whatsoever. I thought turning the lights off was just a trap, but legit, no one was there. Waited for what felt like 5 minutes but what was probably 2. Got my energy back, sprinted the hell out of there as far as I could run without stopping. Got into this cross section of walkways into the neighborhood and backwards. Out of the foresty surroundings. Walked back onto the main street with gas stations and grocery store and whatnot. We made it. Shit actually rattled me the whole following week. being in similar darkness or even seeing headlights at night. Already knew this extremely well, but it seriously reinforces how much we should look after women who are out at night, actively sticking with / protecting ones you know, or just giving non-threatening body language and space for the ones you don't. Cause shit. I'm a 27-year-old dude and I was losing my ducking mind over that one. When I was younger, my grandmother would babysit me every other weekend. One weekend she told me she had to babysit her friend's son on that Saturday, but that she would take me home late that Sunday to make up for it. I clearly remember playing all day with this blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy with a stripped shirt and beige shorts. That night, I had to sleep in the guest room while he took my room. Being a kid, I waited for my grandma to leave his room after putting us to bed to see if maybe he still wanted to play. When I walked in, he wasn't there. The bathroom is right across from our room, so I figured maybe he was in there, but also, no one. I looked back into the room and I swear. There was a figure in the closet, big and tall enough to reach the ceiling, shaggy hair looking all over his body and eyes big and yellow that I can only describe as Jabba the Hutt looking eyes, just staring back at me. Since then, I would always make sure my closet was closed, would throw a fit if it wasn't, and would sleep with a night light enough I had never used to do. Years and years went by and I'm a teen still sleeping with a night light, and my grandmother asks me, why do you still sleep with a light? So I told her the story, the memory I have of the boy and the monster. She claims, it never happened. That she never once babysat a friend's child. I still sleep with a night light. This happened last summer. I was visiting my parents who live in a rural / venturing on suburbia area in the deep south. One night I'm having trouble falling asleep, so I decide to go pick up a nightcap. Problem is, there are very few places open around midnight selling alcohol. So I make the drive out to a lonely gas station several miles away, taking the unlit dark country roads which bend and curve heedlessly. As I'm coming around a bend, I see something to this day I'm confounded by. Being the only source of light, my headlights illuminated a creature running at a speed that was like a flash before my eyes. It ran on all fours, the body too large to be a dog yet wasn't exactly the shape of a wolf, or dog for that matter. It had matted black fur, which shone in a silver tint in the light in its eyes. I'll never forget the eyes. They didn't look at me yet shone brilliantly in the headlight glowing red eyes. The kind of eyes you read about or see in movies and think are fantastical, but there I was witnessing them. I get the creeps even typing this. I only told select few family members about this. Something about that creature was off and I can't shake the feeling that I saw something I shouldn't have. Almost like a creature that doesn't belong in this world. Or maybe I wasn't supposed to see it. The whole thing just felt so much like witnessing something that doesn't belong in this world or dimension and is wrong. Only had one that was truly beyond for me. I was 19 at the time. Buddy of mine was on leave in the USMC visiting. Going to sleep, I let him sleep in my bed and I took the couch. The couch was one of those L-shaped sectionals. The short part of the L was at my feet and there was an ottoman in front of the couch in that little area. Had one of those weird sleeps where I woke up before opening my eyes. When I opened them, I saw a creature standing right next to the ottoman. Like within arm's length. There was a light on in the hallway, so it was like a silhouette from the light behind it. Not enough light from the streetlight to make it super clear from the window behind me. It was about 3 to 4 feet tall. All I can remember from its features is it had super greasy hair covering most of its face. I saw it as soon as I opened my eyes, and I just closed my eyes back shut and turned around to face the back of the couch/window. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like the moment I saw it, my entire body was filled with terror/dread. As soon as I turned around, I heard like a loud whisper in my ear/thoughts, "I saw you, see me, don't act like you didn't." Even more terrified. I just stayed silent, didn't move, and basically was praying until I eventually fell asleep. At some point I heard my buddy wake up and use the bathroom and lay back down. I probably would have forgotten about it except the next morning when eating breakfast, my friend mentioned how he woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and felt like the house was haunted. Gave me the heebie-jeebies. I've had sleep paralysis, lucid dreams, false awakened dreams, and this wasn't like any of those. The only truly supernatural thing I ever saw that I couldn't explain away. I was raised off-grid on an uninhabited mountain, except for my family. We were the first established homestead on that mountain ever, and first residents since the early 1900s miners left. The log home we built was located about a half a mile down from a deserted mining camp. There is still little published history recording that camp's journey up there, or who mined there. It was in operation roughly 15 years, and boasts about 9 cabins. The camp has traded hands many times since I was a child. I used to hike to it, and play around the cabins. I remember in the most intact cabin, there had been a notebook. I read passages from not only the current owner, but also one of the past owners recounting tales of the little blue girl. Later, I had found remnants of an old children's fort built with a 1900s handmade cabin door hung in a mistletoe fir tree for a treehouse. One night when we all came home, we cleared dirt and built a fresh home, no bones or artifacts. One fall evening, as we entered through the mudroom into the house, we all heard a strange noise. We looked at the front door going to the front porch, and the deadbolt was locking and unlocking very fast. It takes some muscle to lock and unlock a deadbolt. It quit, I said, Mom? She walked up to the front door, opened it, and there was nothing there. She shut the door, the deadbolt locked and unlocked and remained still. It was just the wind, she said. And it never happened again. Years later, in my mid-20s, I was taking a family friend for a horseback ride. We walked along, enjoying the early spring day and the horses, chatting about whatever came to mind. Suddenly, about 40 yards off, we heard a little girl laugh loudly. My friend smiled, and said, "Oh, you have children up here." I shook my head and replied, "No, we don't. There isn't another soul for a few miles, no children until well after that." She seemed to turn a bit pale, then asked, "Well, what was that?" I sat quiet. I thought I knew what it was, that I had had my first encounter with a little blue girl. But not wanting to spook my friend or sound crazy, I just said, "I don't know." We continued our ride, and had no issue. One more weird thing about my mountain, is not very often but out of the blue I have experienced this really awful feeling, like something evil is close. I was having a chat with an older gent who is an avid outdoorsman and overall tough guy who owns property up there, and we started talking about strange happenings up there. I asked him about the evil feeling, thinking he'd laugh at me and poke fun, but to my surprise, he got dead serious. He recounted a time he was in his cabin, and in his words, he ain't scared of shit. All of a sudden he said it was like the darkness outside got even darker, and he became terrified. He said the hairs on his arms stood up, and he had half a mind to get in his truck and leave. He admitted he had never felt like that before, and was glad I'd said something because he thought maybe something was wrong with him. He mentioned it had lasted about 10 to 15 minutes, but felt like an eternity. We have no clue what that is. 12 years ago, on a road trip back from a Blink-182 concert in LA. We were driving east through Arizona, headed back to Ohio on a 33-hour road trip because the other guy just loved Blink so much that somehow we had to do this massively long trip for just one concert. But that's neither here nor there, the real point was spending time with these two girls lol. I was driving at the point this happened. Middle of nowhere, middle of the night, we come to a stop behind a bunch of cars waiting on some construction. The four of us were talking for a bit as we sat there, two girls, two guys, and I distinctly remember rotating yellow lights on the construction vehicles and lots of red light from all the rear car lights. A few songs played while we were joking, laughing, one girl was smoking. Eventually, we were like, haven't we been here ducking forever? And we started looking around. It's construction, who knows what the delay is. So we wait. Gets on 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Eventually I'm like, are the construction cats even moving? I get out of the car, there are orange cones lined up everywhere, I'm picking my way through. I shit you not, there's nobody in the construction vehicles. They're just sitting there. I'm like, yo, what the duck, this traffic jam is pointless, we need to just go around, and I look at the other cars to try to tell the drivers. I shit you not, there was nobody in the cars either. We'd just been sitting at a traffic jam in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night behind a bunch of cars and construction vehicles that were on but nobody was in them. I jumped back in the car and we took off like a bat out of hell. But to this today I have no ducking clue what that was about. Not a hallucination, I wasn't asleep, all four of us saw this. Looking in other cars and seeing nobody in any of them. I didn't stop to see if there were tracks in the sand or anything. Just duck that. Devil. At least, that's what my parents said about their own experience, and I later also thought my husband and I may have encountered. Decades ago, my parents were driving through a mountainous region near Guanajuato, Mexico. They had been driving all day, straight through from Houston. A relative was doing very poorly, and they didn't expect him to have very long left to live. My parents couldn't find a flight out together on short notice, so they pluckily decided to drive all the way. A couple of friends came along to share the drive, though from what I remember of the story, my dad drove the entire time. Anyway, it was very late and very dark. They hadn't had dinner or snacks or something and were rather peckish, so were making comments like, what I wouldn't give for a burger, etc. Then my dad says, you know what I really want? A chili raspa, snow cone. And lo and behold, up ahead on the dark, winding, mountain road, was a man pedaling along on his raspa cart. My dad slowed, and everyone in the van had gone silent. It was an honest-to-goodness raspa guy. Out there. In the middle of nowhere, middle of the night. WTF? Don't stop, he heard someone say. Don't look and don't stop. He trained his eyes on the road ahead, carefully going around the pedaling man, and then sped up. Later, they all denied having said not to stop. They claimed to have been focused on the strange and unlikely sight of a man pedaling a raspa cart out in the middle of nowhere. A few years ago my husband was working overseas, so my cats and I took the advantage of all being able to cuddle up in bed and watch TV. Towards the door to the bedroom we have a coat rack that has been, and had been, there for years. As we're all snuggled up I watch the coat rack slide across the floor horizontally a few feet and then just throws itself down in the middle of the room. My cats jumped out of bed as fast as they could and I was screaming. I waited a few minutes, after turning on every light in the house, to check it out and put it back where it should be. It never happened again. My husband still believes that a cat probably ran off when I wasn't looking and jumped on it, but not only were they in bed with me, but I watched it move like someone was dragging it. Shortly after there was a lot of things like the usual footsteps in the hallway getting louder, knocks on the closet door, and the time my husband and I had the same nightmare at the same time. And yes, I have CO detectors that work. When I was very young, 5 or younger, I would sleep with my bedroom door open. I liked having the light from the hall come in. The head of my bed was against the same wall that my door was in, and my dresser was between my bed and door against the same wall. The dresser would block the light from hitting me and keeping me awake, but at least I could see my room. I hated going to bed when I was young, like most kids. I always had trouble falling asleep, though. Until I was a teenager I thought it was pretty much normal to lay in bed for 45 minutes to an hour before falling asleep. I would think about some weird stuff during that time. Like, for instance, coming up from somewhere with the idea that my family were aliens. I was always scared of aliens growing up. And I have this one memory that I think all this other stuff, my fear of aliens and thinking my family are secretly aliens, is built around. See, one night I went to bed and, as usual, I wasn't tired at all. I lay there on my back thinking about how long it's going to be just doing nothing and being bored until sleep finally comes. My eyes itch, so I raise my hands and rub them with the sides of my knuckles. This wasn't tiredness, it was just itching like from allergies. I rub my eyes for maybe a few seconds, then open them and let them readjust to the dim light in my room. Something is wrong with that light, though. It's too dim. Without sitting up or more than just turning my head, I look past my dresser towards the door. It's been nearly 40 years since this happened and I can still remember exactly what it looked like, and I still have no idea what it was. The best I can say is that it was a head, the top of a very strange head. It looked like it had some kind of skin, but the skin was almost totally white, no pigment at all. And it was wrinkly, like something out of Star Trek's makeup studio. I couldn't see anything else, but whatever this head was attached to was standing right in my doorway blocking the light. My tiny paranoid brain, of course, immediately shouted alien. Silently to myself. I closed my eyes and stayed perfectly still, thinking if maybe I didn't move it wouldn't notice me and would just leave. In what felt like a few more seconds it was morning. I must have fallen asleep like that, because I just woke up like nothing had happened. Oddly, I was still laying on my back, when all my life I usually wake up on my side. When I was about 11 my brother, 9 and I were sleeping on the trampoline out by our back pasture. This is something we did often, during the summer, but that night was different. He and I both woke up at same random time during the night and decided to go inside to get more blankets. On our way back outside to get back onto the trampoline we noticed that the south-facing fence to the pasture was significantly further away than it was before. Not like the fence had moved, but the entire pasture had just moved half a mile away from where it had always been. We walked towards it thinking it was just some trick the lighting was playing on our eyes, but as we moved closer, we found ourselves standing in what would be the middle of the pasture. Except the pasture was still a good quarter mile away from us. We both got very weirded out, so we went back inside and decided not to sleep on the trampoline that night. The next morning the pasture was back to how it had always been, as if nothing had happened. He and I still talk about today and we both remember it vividly. When I was 17 I was out and about with my friend, L16, at about 1 a.m. We lived in an area that has lots of forestry around it and we decided to take a ride up the mountain. We turn off the highway onto the dirt road leading up the mountain and I start to get a bad feeling. I brush it off thinking it's just because how late it is. We keep driving for a few miles when L turns to me and says something doesn't feel right, we should leave. I comment saying I thought I was just being paranoid, but begin to make a 4-point turn to flip around on this narrow road. Partway through the turn, while I'm in reverse, my car suddenly shifts into neutral without either of us touching the gear shift. We look at each other while trying not to panic, and I shift back into drive and take off. We turn back onto the highway and hit about 80 miles per hour and start to calm down. We look to our right and there is something right next to my car with glowing red eyes keeping pace with us. We panic again and I punch it, trying to lose whatever the hell this thing was. We don't shake it until I decide to pull into a church parking lot, only then does it leave. My grandparents lived in the middle of nowhere in Florida, and I spent a lot of time with them because my parents were super young and weren't really up for the whole parenting thing. About half mile from their house was a creek I would always walk up and down looking for small fish to catch and release. One day I was climbing a berm next to the creek, and when I crested the top I saw a dark-haired woman in a white dress leaning over the water crying to herself. The nearest house was my grandparents', and their neighbor was another mile down the road, so there was no reason this random woman should be in the middle of an isolated forest. I just sat there for a minute watching her, hiding behind the berm. After a couple minutes she suddenly stands up and lets out a blood-curdling scream. I'm talking a scream that sounded like someone was skinning her alive. Obviously I absolutely shit my pants and booked it back to my grandparents' house. Those woods were relatively well known as being a dumping ground for murder victims, but I don't think it was paranormal or anything, just very unusual. Most likely a woman who was cracked out of her mind and wandered into the woods. My grandma called the cops, but seeing as it was the middle of nowhere it took FSP 6 hours to show up, so whoever it was long gone by that point. I've told this story here before and someone informed me about a Spanish folktale about La Llorona, which does fit pretty well with what I saw, but I still think it was just a lost crackhead. I usually go hiking and stay in the forest overnight, sleeping in a bivvy and sometimes under a tarp. Now it's important to say I'm based in Europe. So no wild animals to be afraid of because usually they just boot it as soon as they notice you. So one winter night I'm sleeping under my tarp, which connects to the ground on one side. It's in an area where there were fierce battles in the forest on the border between Germany and Belgium in World War II. I hear something walking in the leaves, which is normal. There are always deer and feral pigs on and about. But this time it comes closer and closer until I hear it right on the other side of my tarp and it starts growling. It's a noise I had never heard, and for a moment I was frozen trying to figure out what it might be and what to do. But I just decided to yell back and that did the trick. The animal walked a few steps and then turned back to growl once more before finally retreating. Let's put it this way, I didn't sleep for a while after that. I looked up the noise and think it was a badger. Staying on Galveston Island at a friend's place alone so I could get some writing in was the scariest moment for me. Galveston, Texas has a horrible history by way of a hurricane in the 1900s that killed thousands of islanders. It's a known go-to for people that like the ghost history and supposed haunted hotels. I was in the bedroom and wanted a glass of wine. I was staying in the apartment above the garage. The lights were off except for a small light in the back bedroom and over the stove so I could see fine. There were wine glasses hanging on a holder over the sink next to the stove. I was opening the bottle and when I turned around to get one of the glasses they started moving. All of them clanking and moving. I had my phone with me and captured it. I couldn't move. Just stared at those glasses, taping them, trying to quickly go through rational explanations. No wind, no trains, no other movement in the house that I could see or hear. I took that bottle with me to the room and locked the door. Creepy. I used to hang out with this guy who lived on a big property that backed onto a forest. We would often go to a spot in the trees behind the house to smoke pot. One day while we were hanging out we found his dad's big steel woodsman's axe. This thing was heavy duty and sharp as hell. We decided to go out to the spot in the woods where we usually smoked and try it out. This axe was mean, it was heavy as hell and we could easily chop through younger trees with 1 or 2 chops. So, we got stoned and a little chop happy, and by the time the sesh was done we had chopped down more than a dozen trees, really thinned out the trees around our smoke spot. We finished up and went back to the house. Cut to a few days later. I'm back at my buddy's place, and we decide to go back into the woods and smoke. Once we walked out to the usual spot, I noticed something really strange. All of the trees we had cut down were standing, completely intact and untouched, as if we hadn't chopped any of them. I thought I was tripping out, so I said to my buddy, "Didn't we chop a bunch of these trees down?" When he looked around and realized what happened, we both just froze. It was a really eerie feeling, like deja vu in reverse. We left and didn't really go to that spot in the woods anymore. I have no explanation for what happened. We both remember chopping down a bunch of trees. We were both very familiar with the spot as we smoked there quite a bit. We even had seating area set up there, so it's not like we got confused about where we were. Those trees are still standing behind that house to this day. When I was 15, I was going with my neighbor to a cemetery, which has a chapel in the mid-placed. Usually the chapel was closed by a lock, but this time the lock was completely destroyed. So my neighbor and me going in and are looking around. Rat excrements and many German newspapers from 1988 was in this chapel on the ground. After we saw enough, my neighbor wanted to go home again. But instead of getting out the door, it seems to be locked again. The door didn't let itself open. Closed. We were locked in a chapel, which was closed since 1988 because of the danger of collapse of this building. In this time, 20 years ago, it was not usually that everyone had a mobile phone. After around 10 hours the door goes open and we could get outside. That was my creepiest event that I have ever experienced. Since then I know that something supernatural and spiritual things are real. One time I was driving home from my boyfriend's. At that time he lived way out in the country, and so I had to take several back roads to get home. It was probably around 12 a.m. I was driving at the bottom of a hill, and at the top I see a shadow of what I figured was a large farming machine. It was common to see those on these roads. All I knew is it was massive. As I approached the top of the hill, the figure kept getting smaller. When I reached the top, I had to slam on my brakes. There was a single deer halted in the center of the road. I was stopped in the middle of the road. The deer was acting strange. It walked abnormally right up to my window. It just stood there staring right at me. I did normal things to get it out of the road, honking, flashing my lights. It wouldn't move. I figured I did everything I could, and since it was by my window and not in front of the car, I started to drive away. In my mirror, I see it still running after me. I go as fast as one can on a curvy back road until all I can see behind me is figure I had seen before. This figure that well over triple the size of my car. I just sped away and tried to just get myself home. The next day, I drove to his house. In the exact same spot I had seen the deer, there was a man standing to the side of the road. Just staring. It gave me the same eerie feeling as the deer. My boyfriend has moved since, but I think about it often. Was it a skinwalker? Who knows? When I was about 14 years old, my parents bought a house that was mostly built in 1941. It had an addition that was put in around 2001. The ghosts enjoyed the hell out of the new addition. The addition had a total of 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. It was 2 stories, and the top story was essentially a large loft and 3rd bedroom. It happened to be my room. There'd be several times where I'd be downstairs all by myself. I'm an only child, and suddenly I'd hear running footsteps from my room to just about halfway down the staircase. That was their favorite way to communicate aside from being shadow people. Nonetheless, that wasn't the creepy part of living there. My parents' room was the master bedroom on the side that was built in 1941. Right outside of their room was the attic access for that side of the home. For the life of me I cannot remember the events that happened before my mom had had enough of whatever was going on. I think there was a lot of knocking, scratching, or movement up in the attic that made her ask my dad to check the space. Fearing for some raccoons or opossums in the space, my dad delegated an entire weekend to it and adding more insulation. I don't think anyone had ever gone up there aside from the home inspector, so it was also time to see if the old homeowners left anything behind. Boy did they. We found a ventriloquist doll, a suitcase full of old love letters turned bitter, a shovel easily from the 1920s, burnt-in-place candles, a Victorian-style dining chair, and a few lockets of hair pinned to the cross beams. It looked like a space straight out of a horror movie set. My dad decided to clean everything out of the attic, including the doll and pinned hair. No signs of animal activity. Ghosties did not like that, and shit only ramped up throughout the remainder of my years there. I left at 17 because I married my high school sweetheart. Even my skeptic of a mom would see shadows darting from room to room. Doors would open on their own, and bad thing after bad thing would happen to our family or the home. I go to forests regularly, just for random strolls and hikes. While I did kind of get accustomed to fear training, going out at night and just encountering whatever comes up. I also like to listen to the animals and getting to know the sound of them. I'm not scared alone, and in the region I live in, there's not much real reason to be scared. No predators dangerous for humans, and very little crime. One night, a very strange feeling came up, driving me to go back as fast as I can, until I almost ran for no reason. It was an instinctive, primal fear which was much more real than a subtle, uncomfortable feeling you might know when going into dark areas alone. Somewhere, In the distance, a soul-crushing scream made my bones weak. It was no animal, but it also was no human. At least it didn't sound like anything I've heard. Never found out what it was, or could have been. I still like forests at night. After all, it was just a strange sound in the distance. But what still makes me ponder is this feeling I got before this scream. I had just successfully defended my dissertation and my wife and I decided to have a modest celebration by going for a short camping trip. Cold blue wind that night. If I had believed in such things, I might have decided it was a bad omen. In any case, soon we was to the forest setting up our tent. We decided we was gonna walk to the lake. Pretty soon I realized my wife wasn't talking no more, so I looked over and seen that was totally pale, looking up into the sky. I said, "What's wrong, Darlene? You gone pale as a ghost." She just kept looking up. So I looked up and seen a dark triangular craft hovering silently over our head. A menacing light come out of it was about to get us when suddenly a glowing figure appeared on the other side of the lake. It looked like a large, transparent, hominid. Suddenly the craft shot over to the other side of the lake and shed its light at the glowing figure. I said, "Darlene, let's get out of here now while we still can." Then we ran away and didn't never go back. We even left all our camping gear. Back when I was in college, I worked as a housekeeper and dietary aide at a nursing home/rehab center. One wing was for rehab patients, and the other 2 wings were for long-term residents. One night, right before we served dinner, we got a new patient who was on hospice and wasn't expected to be alive much longer. She was placed in the long-term wing because our rehab wing was full. We had 2 residents to a room, so we put her in with a woman named Margaret who just lost her roommate of many years, who was also named Margaret. The Margaret that passed away loved gardening. She had her own area out in the courtyard that she could grow her flowers in. This is relevant. So after dinner, I go back upstairs from the kitchen to get the dirty dishes. As I'm walking down the hallway to the hospice patient room, I hear her yelling, "Get her out of here. Get her out of my room. She needs to leave." A CNA beat me to the room, but I was right behind her. The CNA asks what the problem was, and the hospice patient says, "Get Margaret out of here." The CNA calmly told her, "This is Margaret's room too and we won't be making her leave." The hospice patient then says, "No. Not that Margaret. The other Margaret with the flowers in her hands." The other Margaret had passed away only a few days before this woman moved in, and the hospice patient passed away the next morning around 5 a.m. Seems like Margaret was hanging around in her old bedroom, and bothering the woman who took her bed. I was walking alone around 11:30 p.m. close to the cemetery behind my house, and I had earbuds in playing fairly loud music. I'm walking along minding my business, there's no one walking in front or behind me, and I notice this weird noise fading in and out through the music I'm playing. I focus on it a bit more and yep, can definitely hear something else. So I stop walking. I'm almost to the entrance of the cemetery at this point, take out my earbuds and listen. I then hear from the direction of the cemetery something that sounds like high-pitched wailing, like someone in extreme mental anguish. I turned around and booked it home lol. I read later it could be foxes, but after listening to a few examples from YouTube, it definitely wasn't a fox. At the time, my cousin and I lived on the same road and we would hang out frequently. Living on the same road, we could easily walk to and from each other's houses. One day we were at her house and decided we wanted to walk to my house to play a video game she loved but did not own. The walk was normal, and usually when walking down our road I would look behind us for cars and mostly because I'm paranoid. We were about halfway to my house when I looked behind us and saw a man walking with what looked like a hunting rifle. This wasn't out of the ordinary to me since our road was close to the woods and had great deer hunting locations. However, after I looked, my cousin decided to look as well, but her face shifted from normal to confusion and concern. I decided to look back again to see why she was bothered, and that was when I paid more attention. This man I saw looked like he had no face. He was wearing a red flannel, jeans, long hair in the back but bald on top. Still holding the rifle, just walking down the road. We looked at each other, and bolted it to my house. Once we arrived, we stared out of my living room window waiting for the man to show up again, but he never did. Fast forward a few years, my cousin and I are swapping ghost stories with our grandmother. We bring up the man we saw, yet what creeps me out even more about this is that even though we both remember the same experience, we saw 2 different things. I saw the faceless man, and she saw what I could only describe as a much more visible shadow figure. I understand memories fade over time, so it's possible one or both of us cannot properly recollect what occurred and that what we saw could have simply been a hunter finding somewhere to set up his gear, but I have never forgotten this experience. Driving home late, racing to make out home by curfew down a country road I'd driven a million times. Super dark, only farms and fields in every direction. All of the sudden there's this kid in the road. I could see him so clearly still can 8 years later. Strawberry blonde, red checkered shirt, denim overalls, bare feet. Looking right at me, maybe 5 years old. I hit the brakes so hard ABS kicked in, tires squealing, veered nearly off the road to avoid him. Got out of the car frantically looking for this little boy, absolutely horrified that I'd hit him. Nothing. Not a soul to be seen for miles. I stood there absolutely shocked, heart hammering through my chest. Eventually another car passed and shook me out of it. I drove home in a daze. Didn't make curfew and spent my time grounded researching local farms, old news reports, death certificates, etc., looking for some sort of explanation for the ghost boy I'd seen. Never figured it out. My wife and daughter claim to see shadow people at nearly every house we've lived. I was military, so we moved around a lot, and there were only a couple of places that they didn't see anything. In the past, my wife used to see the infamous shadow man with top hat at a couple of houses, but now it's just a general black man shape. At our current house, they both claim to have seen a black figure out on the deck, from both inside and outside the house, downstairs in the game room, and at the top of the stairs going to the basement. My daughter also claims to have heard movement on the stairs that sounds like me walking in my slippers. They also claim to have feelings when they go downstairs. I, on the hand, believe in this stuff, but I never felt anything, heard anything, or saw anything. I'm kind of like Fuyuki from Sergeant Frog, I believe, but I'm insensitive to the paranormal. The most I've seen is a quick shadow flicker on the all from the Christmas lights in my office. They are behind me, and twice now there has been what seemed like a very quick shadow that moved across the wall in front of me. However, it could just be a millisecond drop in the lights and not a true shadow. Since I haven't heard anything or seen anything, I trust what they say but can't provide my personal opinion. 2 a.m. on a drunken night out, we saw a fully white, grown man sprint across an abandoned grassy field, drop to the ground after I nervously called out to him, and completely vanish in front of our eyes. My friend immediately hit him with a bright maglite within a second after that and couldn't find him anywhere on that large field at all. It was like he magically flipped on a cloaking device after he dropped down. He vanished just like how a potentiometer/dimmer would fade down a light bulb into off mode. We also had a high vantage point above the field at that time, so we could see everything going on. The grass field was cut pretty short, so he had absolutely nowhere to run and hide within that short time period. He was either wearing a white shirt and white pants, or he was completely pale and nude. The moonlight was shining pretty bright that night as well, so we could clearly see his limbs swaying about while he was sprinting across. We both walked out to where he dropped down to investigate it further and were just completely dumbfounded by the whole thing. Rolling back to 2004 in the same area, I saw a car-sized metal disc slowly hovering over past my family van. I unbuckled my seatbelt to look at it through the other window, and it went from flying slow to disappearing in thin air. Kinda like how an old television powers off, just quickly minimizing into a pinpoint dot of nothingness. I tried to get my parents to look at it, but they just told me to shut up as they were arguing about something. Lastly, a few years ago, quarter-mile away from the other experiences, I went outside to smoke one last cigarette before heading to bed at 12 a.m. and saw a very large, white dog galloping across my neighbor's front lawn. It scared me so much that I vocally reacted, and it immediately started heading in my direction. As if it ducking heard me. I got so scared that I got my pocket knife out and quietly climbed up onto the deck, cigarette still in mouth. Right then, I heard it barging through the neighbor's open garage next to our house, and I honestly thought it could easily clear the wooden fence to get to me. This tall, white dog looked almost 6 feet tall from about 15 yards away. It seemed to be playfully jumping through the yard like any other escaped dog would, but it was just so unsettling at that moment. After that, I did some internet scavenging on the dog breed and also of any lost dog postings and couldn't find any useful information. But it was definitely not a horse. It could have been a white Great Dane, but it looked fairly different than the pictures online. I also absolutely hate tall animals after watching Pet Sematary back in elementary school. That's one of my top, biggest fears. So this was about 10 years ago. I lived with some housemates in this really creepy house where inexplicable occurrences would happen semi-regularly. I always chalked it up to the house being old and settling, not getting enough sleep. Deep denial. The feeling I always seemed to never be able to shake was that someone was watching me, or if I was home alone, it would just be really cold and never be truly comfortable. Even the vibe of the house changed as well. There were 5 of us living together and it always seemed as though we were at each other's throats for odd reasons, and the negative tension was always present in the air. I was here for about a year until I made the choice to move out and live with my dad until I could figure things out. Fast forward to me living at my dad's, and everything is pretty mundane and back to normal. I'm seeing a girl and things are getting back on track. One afternoon, my dad heads out to the gym with his partner and I'm home by myself, in my room, chilling. About 5 minutes roll by after my dad leaves when all of a sudden I hear, clear as day, footsteps sliding, kind of shuffling, across the dining room floor. At this point, I'm thinking my dad came back home to grab something and maybe I just missed him entering from downstairs. But that's not possible, since I would have heard the garage door open, the alarm alerting of someone entering the house. These were clear footsteps walking from one part of the dining room to the kitchen. Dad? I call out from my bedroom. As I round the corner, those same footsteps that were slowly shuffling across the floor were now running down the stairs towards the garage. After that it was dead silence. No one else was home but me. I quickly grabbed my keys, noped the duck out of there, got in my car and drove as far and as fast as I could away from the house. To this day I firmly maintain that whatever it was which was at my previous house had followed and subsequently attached itself to me. New environment, same negative almost heavy energy, more inexplicable things that lasted for months. I once slid into a town that didn't exist. When I lived in SC, my parents lived in Western PA, so I'd drive up occasionally. One day I left from my friend's house in Asheville, North Carolina and started heading north. For some reason I didn't get gas before I left, and after a bit I'm running very low. I'm in Tennessee at the moment hoping to see a sign for gas. Nothing for a while. Then I see Chevron on a sign and get off. I come into this small town. As I start down the main street to the gas station, I get a very weird feeling. As I slowly move through, I notice the town is empty. No one anywhere, no cars moving around. A few blocks and I see the gas station and I pull in. The place looks like it's not been open in decades. Everything is covered in dust. I decide not to stick around and start to pull forward, never even turning off my car. As I leave the station, a large black object runs out from the side of the building. Like Cujo-sized dog. I pass through it. There is a thump but not in the same way of running over, like passing through a jello. Soft. I hit the brakes but see nothing my mirrors. Feeling gets stronger, like it wants me to get out of the car, but if I did bad things would happen. Took off, went back to the highway, next exit a big casino and all sorts of things. Get gas, move on. Weird, but it gets weirder. I've tried to find the town on Google Maps. I cannot. I found the casino and truck stop, but the town before it and the exit is laid out different. Not sure what happened, if I slid into an alternate world, or the past, or what.